We're going to start with Vice Chancellor Garcia on our state and federal legislative update.
Good morning, President, Chancellor, and members of the board. I'd like to give you a quick update on state legislative issues as well as cover some federal, and then you have your reports that you can look at for more in-depth information about specific bills. But what I'd like to do is just highlight some of the bills that have been most pressing and significant from a policy, statewide policy perspective. So for the state legislative process, where we're at now is this week the legislature is scheduled to go on a recess. And yes, they will have recess given the fact that they did approve the budget. And they'll be returning August 15th for the last month of session. The policy committees for both houses completed their work last week, so there was a lot of activity. Some of the more complex and challenging bills tend to be held off until the final hearing, which I'll talk with you about a few of those. And those bills now are in the second house and going to appropriations. So when we come back August 15th, both houses will have their appropriations meeting. Well, they'll complete their work by their deadline, which is August 29th, I believe, 26th. And so there'll be a lot of activity, again, mostly on the fiscal realm when we return for the last month of session. And the final day of session is September 9th. And so bills that are not approved by September 9th are still eligible candidates for two-year bills, which many bills have been held and are in fact going to be two-year bills. So the bills that get approved will go into effect in January 1st if they're non-urgent bills. So let me highlight a couple of the key bills, some of which you're already familiar with, but one really significant bill is AB 515 by Assembly Member Julia Brownlee. This bill would have permitted community colleges who participated, selected community colleges who participate in a pilot program to offer extension courses for credit and offer those courses at the full cost. This is a significant new policy for the community colleges. While currently we do have extension program offerings, but we do not offer credit for any of those courses. So this would, for the first time, allow us to do that. The bill was sponsored by Santa Monica Community College and College of the Canyons, two colleges that have been very interested in pursuing this type of program for some time, and were fairly aggressive in their bill because this bill originally would have permitted all colleges to offer this type of extension program. In the final form, it was amended to be a pilot program, and the pilot program would have, in the final version of the bill, would have said in order to be eligible to participate in this type of pilot project, you would have to meet very specific conditions. And many of those conditions were fairly significant policy changes. For example, you would no longer be able to offer enrichment or activity courses before moving into the extension program realm. You would no longer be able to allow students to repeat courses beyond one course if you were going to offer extension programs. So there were a lot of these types of conditions, which ultimately it became so controversial even for the sponsors of the bill that the author decided to make it a two-year bill. The Chancellor's Office role, we were written into the bill to determine which colleges would participate or which districts would participate in this pilot project based on specified criteria that was laid out in the bill. Now, there was almost unanimous opposition on the part of faculty. Very, very strong feelings about this type of proposal, and there was some very strong support among some of the colleges, CEOs, and boards of trustees around the state. So we had very strong feelings stacked up on both sides of the issue. For the Chancellor's office, we were called on by the author of the bill to help sort out some of these major policy issues and to help narrow the scope of this bill, which is what we did. And we ultimately said, after considerable consultation, we ultimately said, if a pilot were constructed that was narrow in scope, that ensured financial aid access to low-income and needy students, that prohibited colleges who had met or who to participate if they had not met or exceeded their cap for the prior year, and several other provisions and conditions, we would then consider supporting the bill. Well, we never got to the point where the bill was amended to reflect those conditions that we thought were essential until the very last moment. So part of the problem was that the bill ultimately ran out of time and wasn't vetted well enough before it was going to be heard in committee. So it was a learning experience, and I think that for our purposes and looking forward, and I think it's really important that we move forward and look at what this means to us as a system. This bill was heard in the Senate Education Committee. I have to say, Chairman Lowenthal was very, very thorough and analytical in looking at these issues and drew out some of the challenges we face in the community colleges. This issue is a reflection of the major challenges we're facing right now with access. Now, a lot of people, this bill was designed to help address access and provide some course sections to students who were able and willing to pay, as well as financial aid students who had a Pell Grant aid and other aid that they could use to pay for these courses. Obviously, a lot of folks did not like that particular approach to dealing with access, but the bottom line is the legislature, all of us in the system understand how critical the access issue is right now. We can't even begin to complete our conversation about student success if we have a significant problem addressing demand. And so it seems that what was left on the minds of many is, how do we deal with this very, very complicated issue of demand and not being able to supply the course sections that are needed in this environment of no new resources. So that's obviously going to continue to be a challenge, and there's not one approach to how we get to this, but I think the committee focused quite a bit on what are we doing locally in the campuses to ensure that resources are being prioritized to try to open spots up for students who are trying to get into the classes to complete their educational objectives. And there's going to be a lot of pressure. The legislature now is fully engaged on that issue. Are we utilizing our resources at the local level as efficiently as possible? And before we move to any drastic changes from how we do business, have we exhausted all the options we have at the local level to provide access to students? So that issue has been put front and center for many in the legislature, certainly in the higher ed and the Assembly Higher Ed and Senate Ed committees. So I think it's something we're going to be talking about for some time. Now, a word about the challenges it created in terms of some significant tensions in terms of opponents and supporters. I think it's really important that we not lose sight that all of us are in this for the right reasons. We're trying to find ways to serve students, and everyone, whether they supported or opposed the bill, that was the number one issue. There were just different ideas about how to address that issue. So I hope we can come together again and think about new solutions and figure out how we deal with that issue moving forward. Okay. So another issue, I want to bring this to your attention, is SB 292. This is a bill that Senator Alex Padilla has introduced to implement to address any implementation issues that may come forward as a result of the SB 1440 Implementation Task Force. The Implementation Task Force has been working very well I think the task force has addressed a number of tough issues, but the CSU faculty and the community college faculty have been working very well together, and the two administrations have really made progress in sorting through some tough issues. There are still a couple of issues that remain, but none that we believe needs to be addressed in statute. So this is a vehicle, a placeholder for Senator Padilla. He's going to be holding a informational hearing on July 20th in Los Angeles at Southwest College to get an update on the status of the implementation task force and to hear from various individuals on their views of how the program is being developed and whether we're ready for implementation come this fall. So this is a bill he's keeping in case something does come up that everyone agrees needs some statutory attention. But at this point, he doesn't have anything in particular in mind. Now, the reason I'm bringing this to your attention is that what's in the bill right now is placeholder language. He has put it in the bill, and it's a requirement that says community colleges shall accept credits from neighboring community colleges that are part of the transfer guarantee degree. And while we're in agreement that that needs to happen, we don't want to mandate. And he knows we don't want to mandate saying that you have to do this because it triggers the mandate issue, and that's another problem. But I think what's important to note is that he's going to be looking for answers and a commitment to that issue, because he believes if we're requiring CSU to recognize the courses from different colleges that are part of the transfer degree program, that community colleges should probably do the same. So that's an issue that will come up in the hearing. It's one that we've had several conversations with the author and his staff that you can put intent language, but we really don't want to mandate. That's complicated, and it will face its own problems in the Appropriations Committee. So there were some who have read that bill and been real concerned, but I just want to assure everyone that it is being treated as a placeholder to keep the vehicle moving until he has a hearing, and then after that we'll revisit the language and do whatever we need to do. I want to mention another bill that's actually very significant, and it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but it's AB 1115 by Assemblymember Lara. And this is a bill that basically deals with the workforce investment boards locally. And the way it works in California, you have the California Workforce Investment, you have the Workforce Investment Act, and then you have local workforce investment boards. We have 49 of these in California.
Excuse me, Marlene, what page is that?
Page.
Is that on?
Oh, it's a summary. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Page
8?
Yeah.
There it is. It's here on page 8.
So the workforce investment boards determine who their students or trainees, what programs the trainees can participate in and take their federal vouchers or aid to go to these training programs. And in California, they're called California's Training Provider List. Well, this bill will automatically include the community colleges in the California eligible training provider list. And that helps us a great deal, because normally there's a process that each local WIB would establish to determine who's on the list. So this bill is going to streamline that process considerably. Community colleges will automatically be on the list, and then the WIBs are going to be, or the statewide WIB is going to be required to provide one single list that's broadly publicized so that everyone who's interested in this type of workforce training knows who the preferred providers are. So this is a very helpful bill, and one that we think is very important to support. And I know Jose Millan, and I'm sure Vice Chancellor Quinn Livin will be very much appreciative of this change. One last update, AB 160 concurrent enrollment. Your board has been very interested in this issue. We've approached this issue carefully during these times of restricted course sections. We've not wanted to expand concurrent enrollment, but I think this bill, after several...
Excuse me, which bill?
AB 160.
And which page? We're a little lost here.
Well,
Page
this one's summarized on page 2.
It's page
Okay.
2, top of 2.
Yeah. So AB 160 by Assemblymember Anthony Portantino would not expand concurrent enrollment, but rather would clarify and provide additional flexibility to local community colleges who want to offer concurrent enrollment programs if they partner with their local K-12 district. And the idea behind this is that some of the stronger concurrent enrollment programs are those that are coordinated with K-12, such as middle college high school programs, the College Promise program out of Long Beach, and several others. So to encourage community colleges to work in tandem with their local school districts is an important tool in an organizing effort to try to communicate what these programs are about and ensure that both segments are clearly communicating the opportunities to the K-12 students. All of this would happen, though, within the current cap. So colleges would be able to determine what level of priority they want to give these concurrent enrollment students, but they're still subject to their cap. In addition, Assemblymember Portantino has been very, very interested in extending concurrent enrollment opportunities to career technical ed students. So if a student's in a district where there is no partnership between the community college and the K-12 district, a career technical ed student can go directly to the college and talk to the career technical ed dean or appropriate CTE administrator and get approval if there is capacity to enroll in a career technical ed program. So the bill was amended to add those, or the bill includes those provisions that I think strengthen concurrent enrollment program and make it clearer for the students, and it gives the community colleges the ability to manage the enrollment of concurrent enrollment, which is something we've been seeking all along. Now, one last item, and if you have any other questions about bills, I'm happy to answer. Member Maluman?
Well, were you finished?
I'm not, I was going to shift to CPAC.
Oh, okay. Member Malamed.
I just want to ask about what I read in the Sacramento Bee today about SB 79, a bill taking the money and putting it somewhere else, and how that affects us.
Well, I actually took a look at that bill yesterday. That bill is part of a very large tax measure that includes, it's 96 pages long, and we're looking at that right now, trying to understand if there's some implications for community colleges, and we're looking into that right now. As a matter of fact, Dan Troy and I, we're emailing. We got a email from the reporter, and so we've been looking at that. So I'm happy to update you on that and examine that further. But this has been part of the tax bill that's been moving along, and so we want to understand the
So
full
are they
implications.
taking money that we have sitting around waiting to be dispersed and putting it into a higher interest account? Is that what it is? I wasn't quite sure.
I'm not quite sure either. I can't answer that now.
And I assume we don't have that much sitting around.
Exactly. But unlike UC and CSU, we're not going to have historical reserves from prior years sitting here at the chancellor's office. Our system doesn't.
So,
Our system doesn't operate.
right, so it won't.
Yeah, our system doesn't operate that way. You know, we get money and it goes out to the locals. It's a very different system. So, yeah.
Will it affect the local colleges?
Right. Well, our concern is that if they were to take a big chunk of our apportionment and put it into account like this, that would cause colleges to be concerned that that money wouldn't come in, and maybe they would have reduced offerings for that year out of concern that those dollars wouldn't come in. So that's a concern we have. Again, this bill could undergo many changes, so we'll try to track it. But right now, I'm feeling a little bit cautious about it.
Thank you.
Okay. So quickly, I think most of you have heard that the governor blue penciled the funding for CPAC as of July 1st, which is a fairly strong position to take, and the veto message was, fairly critical of CPAC's performance. What that was a lot. That was a $1.9 million reduction. That was their full general fund budget, and 19 positions. We've talked with the executive director, and they're in the process of talking with the administration to see if they can get some lenience in terms of a transition period to deal with a variety of issues. One, their staff, their civil service staff, so they'd have to figure out how to get them placed in other parts of state government, considering the fact that we're under a hiring freeze. And they also sit on a variety of assets. They have a very rich database that all the segments of higher ed contribute to, and it's become a key piece of an intersegmental joint powers agreement to try to develop more of the longitudinal reporting capacity. So there'll be some significant discussions about the future of the assets, as well as whether California should have a coordinating entity to address intersegmental policy issues. Now, based on the veto message from the governor, he's asked the higher ed segments to work together in looking at alternative means to address intersegmental policy issues. So that's, a fairly open-ended request. So I think we'll learn more about that as time passes. For CPAC right now, there's significant concern about how you phase out such an organization that's been around for 30-some years.
Marlene, will they continue, maybe our representatives can speak, will they continue to have board meetings and we will continue to be represented there?
Yeah. Actually, I think a plan is in its embryonic stages right now. And that's a discussion that's actually taking place today at 11 o'clock at the governor's office.
Okay.
To have the September meeting and possibly the December, if this coordinating body is no longer going to exist, to find a way to transition out of this in a very positive way. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if there are no more questions about state legislation, I'll shift briefly to federal update. There has been a lot going on at the federal level that affects the community colleges across the country, and we've been working quite closely with the Association of Community College Trustees and the American Association of Community Colleges in monitoring the various actions. Congress is, as you all know, working and has not met its deadline, or has not yet addressed the debt ceiling issue. An August 2nd deadline is approaching, and by then they need to have some kind of compromise in order to move forward on various budgeting matters. So they're focused on that issue, and meanwhile, their appropriations measure is not gaining much traction. It's pretty much they're at a standstill. The House has its version of the budget, which has stalled in the Senate, and the Senate is looking at its appropriations measures and has yet to take action. But there are three major issues that we're paying particular attention to. One is the gainful employment regulations that just went into effect on July 1st. These came out of the U.S. Department of Education, designed primarily to address issues concerning the for-profit private institutions, those that offer occupational training programs. Now, the regulations are designed to require new reporting for all higher ed institutions that offer occupational training programs, so that clearly includes the community colleges. So as of July 1st, each higher ed institution that offers gainful employment programs will be required to display various sets of program information on their website, such as occupations that the program prepares students to enter, links to occupation profiles, program costs for the entire program, as defined, normal completion time, on-time completion rates, median loan to debt incurred by students who complete a particular program, and job placement rates for students completing a program. So if you're interested in a nursing program or a drafting program, the college would have to provide this kind of information for the various programs. This is highly burdensome for our colleges. Just in brief conversations with various CEOs, they're having to spend a good deal of their research time trying to figure out these metrics and get them in place to comply with the federal requirements. Some colleges that are having difficulty with these issues are able to seek a waiver until such time that they can respond to these requirements. Now, the other issue with this is if a college is non-compliant with 3 specific issues and they establish requirements that a loan repayment requirement, a debt to discretionary income requirement, and then also a debt to total earnings requirement, that students, if the college has students that don't meet these specified requirements, colleges have up to 3 years to meet that. Otherwise, your financial aid will be taken away. You will be deemed ineligible to offer financial aid. So these are some pretty significant sanctions. Now, the problem, the issue is in 3 years, you have to have not met all 3 of those requirements. And so the speculation is that for community colleges, we're likely to not meet some of those. So for example, debt repayment, if 30% of our students don't repay their loans, then that would be deemed out of compliance. We may have trouble with that one, but it's speculated that with regard to all 3 of those requirements, most of our community colleges should be able to do just fine and not be deemed out of compliance. However, there could be some colleges, maybe a very small percentage, that will in fact get their financial aid curtailed or eliminated if they don't meet those requirements. So this is something that I think is going to be an ongoing discussion and hopefully some streamlining. It's everyone says it's designed for the for-profits, not for community colleges, but they understand the challenges it presents to us because we now have to comply with these new reporting requirements. So there'll be a lot more going on. I suspect next year, if we do have a Washington, D.C. trip, this issue is still going to be discussed and in the process of being implemented. The last issue the federal Pell Grant program is obviously of continued concern. The Republicans would like to reduce funding for Pell Grants, and most of this is centered around the fact that there is a significant multi-billion-dollar Pell Grant funding shortfall, and this has been carried over from year to year. So the Democrats' top priority is to maintain the maximum Pell Grant award at $5,550, where the Republicans would like to see the maximum award level reduced to something just above $3,000. So there's a significant difference in what they think the maximum Pell Grant award should be. Now, the Republicans want to reduce that because they believe that that'll help cover the shortfall, and the Democrats feel otherwise. So this is going to be an issue that we're going to need to continue weighing in on and emphasize how important this is to California students. We have 400,000 students in California community colleges who receive a Pell Grant. So this is very important, and this generates $200 million in resources that come to our students that they spend in our economy as a result of Pell Grants. So this is significant, and it's something that we can work closely with the national community college organizations in registering our concerns. And they've actually, both those organizations have established a project. They've launched a campaign called Save Our Pell Grants, and they're sending emails out to all of us, letting us know when it's timely to send emails or who to target as far as registering our concerns about potential Pell Grant cuts. So that's going to continue. One last item at the federal level is the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. This is a program that we talked about extensively when we were in D.C. in February, because it includes the Community College and Career Training Grant program that has been a very important career technical ed source of funding. And that program has been subject to proposals to cut or eliminate the community college training grant throughout the course of this year. But the Obama administration reached a deal with the key lawmakers in renewing the trade adjustment as part of the free trade agreement. So trade assistance adjustments are part of the larger trade agreements. And so the thought was they were going to eliminate the trade adjustment assistance entirely, which includes our community college piece, but they were able to save that at the last moment last week. So right now, the language is still, we're still intact, and the community college training grant is still available. So we'll see what happens. We'll be monitoring that as it moves through. But again, most of our what we focused on is working closely with the national associations who are there on the ground, providing the day-to-day, communicating day-to-day with members of Congress and the administration. So we'll continue to stay in close touch with them and gather as much information as we can, and let you know if there's any appropriate correspondence that you may want to send as the Board of Governors in support of, particularly in support of, say, for example, Pell Grants. But we'll get that information and forward it to you based on when they think the timing of such a correspondence might be useful. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I have one, and perhaps it's for Jose. On the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, those grants were, the decisions on those, and I asked this just because our local community had applied for one of those. Those were supposed to be decided upon in late June, and I know they have not. Is there any word on the timing of that?
You thought you weren't going to have to go to work, Jose.
You look pretty comfortable in the chair. I just wanted to shake you up a little bit.
Well, I'm happy to be here as a retired annuitant and to provide clarity on this issue.
Yes.
Members of the board, Mr. Chairman, Chancellor Scott, the issue about the Trade Adjustment Act is that it was caught up in the discussions that are going on currently regarding the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling. Because the money had not actually gone out the door and was retained by the federal government,
I see.
it was going to be scored along with everything else that the federal government is holding back. So, like other grants that we're currently waiting for, agreement on the debt ceiling has to occur first, and then we'll find out how much money is going to go out for these particular grants.
But have they scored the grants? Have they
Yes.
reviewed them? They have. So
They have.
if and when that issue is resolved, there'll be an announcement that says X, Y, and Z college has received it.
Exactly.
Okay.
The August 2nd deadline that Marlene, Vice Chancellor Garcia, had referenced in her remarks.
Thank you.
Mr.
Retired
Chairman?
annuitant me on. Yes.
To add to what Jose has said, the latest intel is that an announcement will be made in September,
Okay.
but
Great.
that may change again.
Yes, thank you. Other comments or questions by members of the board? Thank you, Vice Chancellor Garcia. Another excellent report. Thank you. And thank you very much for putting that dinner together last night. Very nice.